This is a tutorial of the NCS Plus software in Sierra 4.0. When you start an examination, you'll always start with the navigator. For NCS Plus, you can either use the Studies tab to select a study that has a preset list of nerves in whatever order you'd like to do them, or you can go straight to the Nerves tab and then either filter by anatomical region or nerve, and you'll find your different nerves here for the different test types in this list. So you can select one nerve at a time through this menu, or you can select multiple. If you know what order you're going to do them in, you can just select the nerves in the order that you want to do them. So if you want to start with a median APB, then F wave, and then a median sensory, and hit OK, it'll put those tests in your study window in that order. I'm going to just pick a study for the sake of this demonstration. So we'll just pick this bilateral upper NCS, and you can double click on the study name or double click on the nerve that you want to start with. We'll start with reviewing how the Sierra Summit hardware interacts with the Sierra software. The base unit has 7 F keys and 3 knobs. The functions of those are labeled at the bottom of the software here. You have 7 F keys and 3 knobs. Each knob has 2 functions. Pushing down the knob selects the second function. So for nerve conduction, the yellow knob, pushing the knob delivers a single stimulus, and turning the knob increases the intensity. The purple knob, pushing the knob, selects different markers or cursors, and then turning the knob moves or adjusts those cursors. And the blue knob, turning the knob when gain is selected, adjusts the gain, and then pushing down the knob will select sweep, and then you can turn the knob to adjust the sweep. The other buttons are all labeled. You have a volume button that can be muted by pushing the knob. You have a next test button, which will take you to the next test in the study menu, or it can be set up to launch the navigator. The view button will change the views in your workspace. You also have a button in the top toolbar to change your views. And then you have delete, which will delete the trace that you're acquiring. Pushing the delete a second time will bring the trace back. Store will take you to the next site after you've acquired a response that you like. Push store to select the next site. Pulse width up and down to increase and decrease pulse width, to enable and disable the averager, and then to run stop, which would be a recurrent stimulation. Again, the yellow knob, pushing the yellow knob delivers a single stimulation. The run stop delivers recurrent stimulation. You can also hold the yellow knob for a full second to do a recurrent stimulation. The buttons on the left here, tab data, is to get into our tab data screen, which is a review of all the examinations and data that you've done. A good place to go and enter your final impressions for your report. And then this is how you actually generate a report from the hardware. You can use either select a report template and go to your favorite report template. The StimTroller is another way to interact with the nerve conduction software. You can actually do an entire examination just with the StimTroller without having to touch the base unit. The StimTroller has a stim and store button and a scroll wheel, as well as 3 custom buttons, 1, 2, and 3. And then this button on the right is to switch polarity. The light will light up either on this side or this side, depending on which side is the cathode. Up at the top of the screen, in the top toolbar, you'll see how you can customize the STIM1, STIM2, and STIM3 buttons. These can have different functions for different test types. So for motor, typically STIM1 we have set for distance, and STIM2 is next test, and STIM3 is pulse width. For sensory, we often set up STIM3 for trace history, and for F waves, we usually use STIM3 for delete last, but that can all be customized by the end user. The software itself has 4 main windows that will be used during acquisition. The study window is where you'll select what test you want to do. You can add additional tests to the study window through the navigator, and the navigator can be found with the F7 button on the base unit or clicking it with your mouse. There's also a navigator icon that you can turn on in the top toolbar. The results table is where you'll see your results as you collect data. You'll notice there's different tabs that we will review as we continue through the software tutorial. The live monitor is where you can see your live baseline. You can use the volume knob to turn up the volume if you want to hear the baseline activity, and then you can adjust the gain and sweep as needed in this window. The trace window, or the NCS Plus window, is where you'll interact the most with the software during acquisition. In the trace window, this is where you'll select what site you want to test. So you'll see on the right-hand side of the screen, and in the bottom right corner, you'll see the selected or active site will be centered, and then any additional sites available for this test will be down below. If you see an eye icon, the eye icon means that there's additional sites that are available for this test that are hidden. Maybe you don't do them very often. So clicking the eye icon will unhide the hidden sites, and then clicking it again will hide those. So that's just a place where you can have sites that aren't done routinely. The plus icon allows you to insert a site on the fly. So as you're testing, if you decide you want to insert an additional site that may not be listed or hidden, you can hit the plus icon and insert that into the test. Across the top of the trace window, you have some buttons for fixing mistakes, which we'll review later. And then you see the title bar. In this case, I'm just using simulator. Normally you wouldn't see this, but you'll see the test, the name of the test that you're doing, and the recording site. For adjusting gains and sweeps, again, is the blue knob. You can also point to anything you see in the trace window and either roll your scroll wheel on your mouse or click your mouse up and down to adjust gains or sweeps. To adjust settings in a specific window, just look for a cogwheel. Most windows have a cogwheel, and that's where you'll go to adjust any specific settings within a window. So the trace window cogwheel, you could come in here to change the graticule size, the type of trace history you use, etc. So quite a few settings based on what your preferences are. The top toolbar is customizable again by the end user. You can right click and decide what tools you want to use and which ones you don't, just by checking the box. The standard tools that you'll see, the first one is the amplifier tool. Here you'll see what channel you're set to use. The filters, you can see there's a cogwheel for additional settings, there's a delay setting, and then the notch filter. If there's an X over this icon, that means the notch filter is off. If there's not an X, the notch filter is now on. This icon is the patient information screen. This will bring up the patient info screen to either add to or edit the patient information. This is the tab data window. This will bring up your tab data screen, which is really the kind of final review screen where you can go through all the data that you've collected and finalize your report. This shows the side that you're testing. You can click that actually to change sides. So now we're testing the right side or the left side. You'll notice when I click it, it changes here because I have both listed in the test in the study window. If I didn't have both sides listed here, it would just automatically add the other side to the study window when I push this button. This is the STIM window, or the STIM toolbar, and you'll see this will actually light up when you stimulate, the dot here, that lights up yellow when you stimulate. If you have a high impedance, that will show up with a Z, and you can see that Z. You also see a number below. That number is the delivered current. So you'll notice we have the current set to 15 milliamps, but because there's high impedance, it only delivered 9.7 milliamps. So that's a nice feature there to know exactly how much current is being delivered to the patient. This is your stim pulse. So you can do a biphasic pulse or a monophasic pulse. Sometimes a biphasic pulse is helpful to get rid of stim artifact, especially in lower limbs. And here you can see your stim intensity, which can be adjusted by the base unit or the StimTroller or your mouse, as well as the pulse width. The rep rate here, if you're doing recurrent stimulation, and you can select that just by a drop down, and then you have your polarity for your stimulator, which corresponds with the polarity button on your StimTroller. And then this is additional stim settings, which will bring up an additional window where you can see how you can put in additional you can change the biphasic pulse, you can change the different stim counts, the pulse width, etc. So again, anytime you see a cogwheel, that means there's additional settings to be set up if you need to. This is your averager toolbar where you can turn on or off the averager, reject, average count, etc. The temperature toolbar allows you to see the temperature if you're using our temp probe. If you're not using our temp probe, you can always type in the temperature of whatever temperature monitoring device you're using, so it'll show up in the report. You can also select where the temp probe is placed on the patient if you want to. This is the custom keys toolbar where you can set up the custom buttons on the StimTroller and the foot switch functions. So you just choose from a drop-down list what function you want that particular button to do on the StimTroller or the foot switch. This is just to turn on or off the study window. This is your navigator, also accessible with the F7 key on the base unit. And this is your view, where you can actually have two workspaces set up if you need to for NCS Plus. And there's also a view button on the base unit. Now we'll start acquiring data. I've selected the bilateral lower NCS study, and so all those tests are listed in the study window. And I have the right tibial motor test selected to start with. So we'll see here, make sure we have the right test selected and the right sites available to us. I'm going to start by increasing the intensity on the StimTroller and then deliver a single stimulus. And then you'll notice as we increase and get additional traces, the previous traces show up and stay on the screen for comparison reasons and then slowly disappear into the background. So it's easy to know when you have a super maximal response. Additionally, it's keeping the best trace rather than the last trace. So if you want to move your StimTroller around and see if you can get a better response somewhere else and it ends up being worse, it's going to keep the best one rather than the last one. That is because F1 is enabled. F1 is hold Mmax. This is a motor test function. And so when that's blue, that means it's keeping the best response. If we turn that off, then when we start stimulating, it's always going to hold on to the last response stimulated. If you want to pick a previous trace, you can always bring up the trace history, and that's either with the F4 button or there's an icon on your trace to bring up trace history. Then you can quickly hover over all the stimulation sites and then click on the one you want to keep. The yellow one is the currently selected one. The white one is the one I'm hovering over. Store will take me to the next site. And now I'm at the knee and I can start stimulating the knee. Then I have the intensity set to start where I left it off. That's an option. So starting at 51, I'm going to slowly increase from there until I get a super maximal response. If you want to overlay your responses to compare amplitude or morphology, simply push the F2 button. And then you can toggle to XY align by pushing the F2 button a second time. And a third time will raster the traces once again. If you want to see if you can get a better response at a site, simply push the plus T icon, which gives you the option for a new trial. This is going to save the existing trial and give you a new trial of data. So now you can re-stimulate and see if you can get a better response. Now you can add a third trial or fourth trial, or by pushing the T2 button, you can compare your two trials and pick which one you like the best. The red is the selected trial. When reviewing through the data, you can see which traces have more than one trial because the T1 button will be shown and highlighted. Pushing the T1 button allows you to see both trials and compare the two. Only the selected trial will be printed out. Once I'm happy with my responses, I can put in my distance. You can enter your distance straight from the StimTroller just by pushing the 1 button and then scrolling the wheel to the distance that you measured, and then 1 again to enter. Or you can just type in the distance on your keyboard on your computer. The distance field is always active, so anytime you type in a number on your keyboard, it'll enter the distance. If you want to adjust cursors, you can use the purple knob for that. Just push the purple knob and select the cursor you want to move, and then turn the purple knob to move that cursor. So the cursors will auto-adjust, but you can adjust them and move them however you'd like. And you can also do that with your mouse as well. When you're moving cursors, you'll notice this green bar. This shows you your reference limits. So as long as the cursor is within this green area, it's normal. As soon as it gets out of the green area, it's going to be abnormal, and it's going to show the result in red or optionally in bold. You can also hover over your results and see those green bars in the trace window. To continue to the next test in the study window, I'm going to push next on the base unit or the number 2 button on the StimTroller. That takes me to the tibial F wave. It remembered the intensity that I found that the tibial ankle stimulation at, and so I can just start stimulating the ankle, and it's going to start collecting F waves. I can do a single stimulus, or I can use run stop. Holding the stim button on the StimTroller for a full second will start a recurrent stimulation. Pushing it again will stop the recurrent stimulation. You can see the F waves are shown in both a raster and overlay view. You can easily move the cursor with your mouse or with the purple knob to adjust the cursor position. This line is just adjustment of gain between the M wave and the F wave. So moving this line back and forth will adjust the gain. You can right-click on individual traces to either exclude them or delete them. There's also an invert trace option if you had your electrodes on backwards. If you prefer individual F markers, you can go into the common F mode button and disable that button, and that would put individual F markers on each trace. The markers that are shown in the trace window are dependent on what measurements you're looking for in the results table. So if you wanted to see an M latency marker or any other marker, you would need to add that section to your results table. I'm going to push next test, or the number 2 button, and that takes me to the fibular motor test. So here we'll stimulate the ankle, slowly increasing the intensity until we get a super maximal response. You'll notice all the previous traces will disappear, so we don't have to touch anything. Just find your best response and the rest will disappear. Pushing store takes us to the next site, and now we'll find the below fibular head. I'm happy with that one. Store again, and it takes me to the pop fossa site. If I need to, sometimes if you overstimulate, you may get a response. You may activate another muscle or another nerve, and you may want to pick a previous site. So for that, just go right into your history, either on the F4 button, or just click the history button in the site window to bring up your history and select a different trace. If I made a mistake at any point, maybe I was testing the wrong side or I tested out of order, that's what these buttons at the top are for. They're just a quick way to fix mistakes. So the first button is to rearrange sites. So I can rearrange sites either by manually dragging them or just sorting them by latency. If I select the rearrange sites option, I can just click and drag a site, and it relabels it based on the position I put it in. So now I've relabeled these sites ankle, below fib head, and pop fossa. It's always going to keep the sites labeled with the order that's in the site table here. And then clicking it again disables that rearrange function. Or I can click and select sort by latency. This is going to automatically label them by the earliest latency first. So that really fixes a mistake quite easily, because now we can see the ankle, below fib, and pop fossa all labeled correctly and in the right order. The second button here is for swap sides. What this does is if you had tested the wrong side and this data was actually left-hand data rather than right, clicking swap sides would move all this data to the left test, and then clicking it again would move it back. This icon just allows us to change gain and sweep individually per site instead of per test. So if we uncheck one of these, we'd be able to change the gain and sweep of an individual test. If you want to see data that's further out in the sweep, you'll notice at the bottom of the trace window, there's a scroll bar where we can scroll all the way out and select data. On occasion, you may find it necessary to insert a site or a segment on the fly in the middle of your examination. For example, maybe this patient had an injury in the lower leg and you want to do a stimulation site on either side of that injury. So to do that, first we'd want to select where we want that site to go. So I'm going to select the ankle because I want the site to go below the ankle. So wherever I select, the new site will drop in below that site. And now I'm going to just use the insert site icon in the trace window, or I can use the insert site icon in the results window. There's also an insert segment icon in the results window, and that's also accessible through this icon. So I'm just going to use this icon down here.
And here you can see it automatically created a new site called ankle+1. So if I just hit OK, it'll give me another ankle site called ankle+1. If I want that site called anything else, I can simply select from a drop-down list of sites. And if the site that I want isn't in there, I can just type in whatever site I want. Maybe I want this site to be just a leg site. I'll just call it leg. It looks like there is a site in there called leg, so I can select it. But if I wanted this to be called like leg mid calf or something, then I could do that. And if I wanted to, I could click into the add segment tab and add a segment right now. I'm just going to go ahead and hit OK, so you can see the new site. It gets added in between these two sites. And then if I want to do a segment for that site, I can just come over here to the motor segments table, click the plus, and then select the segment. So maybe I want the segment velocity between the leg mid calf to ankle, and maybe I want another one from the below fib head to leg mid calf. And now I'm all set with the new site.
Again, the next button will take us to the next test in the study window. In this case, it's a fibular F wave, and our intensity is all set, so we just start stimulating and acquiring as many F waves as we want. The 3 button on the StimTroller during the F wave test will delete the last site, so if you want to go back and delete a few and then start stimming to collect data again. I'm going to push next again to go to the next test, which in this case is the Searle Sensory. Sensory tests have a few features that are unique and specific to helping improve artifact and noise. The first one is the Improve button, which is the F1 button when you're doing a sensory test. You shouldn't turn this on unless you need it, but if you are getting something like large stim artifact or slow wave that's affecting your response and your baseline, the Improve button is just a post-acquisition filter that will help subtract some of that noise out of your baseline and give you a flatter baseline so that your cursors can measure the response more accurately. You can also do averaging either live or post-acquisition to clean up your response. So we'll start, I'm doing a Searle on purpose, hopefully just to get some noise. I'm in a pretty noisy environment, and I want to show how to clean this up if needed. So there you see we do seem to get a response that's replicating, but there's a lot of noise in the baseline that we can't quite see through. One thing we can do is we can just pick a different trace in the trace history. So on the sensory tests, we have defaulted the Stim3 button to be history now instead of pulse width. So when I hit the 3 button, it brings up my trace history, and then I can just scroll with the StimTroller wheel and find the response that I like the best. So if I like that response the best, and I hit store, and that's the response it'll keep. Because of the noise, the cursors aren't quite accurate on this. It's easy to adjust the cursors with the mouse. If you just click and drag the first cursor, that'll push the second cursor along and leave the first cursor where you want it, and then drag the second cursor down to where you want it to stay. In this case, there's not much. There's a little bit of a slant to the baseline, but not much. I'm going to try the Improve button to see if it helps. And it does slightly. It helps just flatten that out a little bit, just to make these measurements more accurate. If you're measuring on a slant, sometimes you may get a false positive or a falsely increased amplitude because it's measuring on a slant. So the Improve will help just flatten that baseline out a little bit. Another thing you can do is average. Even if you don't want to keep stimulating, you can bring up the trace history, and you can also do that with this button right here. And then we can click the average button or push the average button on the base unit, and that turned those circles into checkboxes. And now we can just hover over the sites that we want to include in the average. And then if we want to include it in the average, just simply click your mouse and it will include it. So we want to add that one, that one. So now this is an average trace of all those sites. You can uncheck them if you want to exclude them, or you can just turn the average off if you want to select a single site. You can still use the Improve button with an average response. It may help flatten it out. Again, don't use this by default, just use it if you need it, and then you can easily turn it off if it doesn't help. The next test in our study is right tibial H reflex. You'll notice a checkbox by all the tests that we've completed. To add other tests to the study window, simply go to the navigator, either the F7 button or the navigator icon in the toolbar. The H-reflex is set up similar to F-waves. You'll notice a smaller increment in intensity, and the stim controller is set up a little bit differently. The stim 1 button you can use to change the H onset cursor, and the stim 3 button is set up to be a shortcut for the F4 button, which is delete last trace. So for H-reflex, we'll just slowly increase our stimulus until we get a H-reflex that we like. Your 3 button on the stim controller or the F4 button on the base unit will delete the last, or you can delete all just by pushing the delete button, and pushing the delete button again will bring them all back. Once you've acquired H-reflexes that you like, you can adjust the cursors simply by pushing the 1 button and rolling back, or using the purple knob on your base unit or your mouse. This is the end of the NCS Plus tutorial. You can look for additional videos on advanced features and setup.